Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Jan. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Sally.
All right, so it is true that parents have to fill out a lot of paperwork, and sometimes
Yes.
students, let's be fair, when
Yes.
their kid goes to college, I actually have a pretty distinct memory of all the paperwork I was supposed to fill out and panicking and just dumping it on my mom's desk. She went through it and then gave me back the parts that I had to do and was like,
Right.
"These you have to fill these out," because I was like, this is too much. So anyway, let's kind of dive right in. What kinds of paperwork are we talking about?
And there's a lot. And some of it might be old-fashioned paperwork, as you
Mm-hmm.
say, and some of it will very much be online. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about paperwork, it could be either scenario. But certainly there's a lot of financial related tasks in paperwork that families together will need to address. And then I'm also going to recommend really being on top of some health related paperwork and tasks as well prior to sending your student off to college.
So what are the tasks that the students need to focus on?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said
Immature
that, Sally.
18-year-olds having to do this. Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that because, I talk to parents all day long, every day. And just this morning, someone said, "Oh, so where do I go to sign my student's student loan master promissory note?" And I said, "You don't. Your
Yeah.
student needs to do that."
Yeah.
So thank you actually for starting there because there are certain types of paperwork that the student actually should focus on.
Mhm.
And so let's start with things related to financial aid first off. And if your student did receive financial aid, they would have received a financial aid award letter. So that's the first place to start. Your student needs to log into their financial aid portal and accept their awards.
Mhm.
Usually grants and scholarships, because they're gift aid, are accepted automatically because no one's going to say no to those. But the student needs to go in and physically accept the student loan that was offered to them. And what happens when they do that, it triggers the college to then reach out directly to the student and send them a link so that they then can go complete their master promissory note and their
Mhm.
entrance counseling. And these are two requirements that students need to do in their freshman year. So the first time that they borrow. And if they don't borrow freshman year, they'll do it for the first time when they do borrow. But essentially, the MPN is a master promissory note. And that is basically a legal document that the student needs to sign. And I say student because the student is the legal borrower.
Mhm.
So they really should be involved in this process. They need
Mhm.
to know that they are indeed borrowing a student loan. And
Mhm.
they will log into, basically they're going to follow the link that the school has provided, but they're logging into the studentaid.gov website, and they're going to sign the note saying that yes, they understand that they're borrowing a student loan and that they do need to repay that. And then as part of that process, they then can complete what's called entrance counseling. And that's kind of a funny name, but essentially it's 10 questions that the student has to answer related to borrowing loans. So do you realize your loan is accruing interest potentially? Do you realize you need to pay it back? So it's 10 simple questions, but important questions for the student to understand. So first and foremost, if your student has financial aid, borrowing loans, they need to accept the awards in their award letter, follow the school's link and directives, complete their master promissory note, and their entrance counseling. And this has to be done so that the student loan funds are then dispersed to the student's account. They're not going to get their money until
Mhm.
those little tasks are done. So that's a big one from a financial perspective. And then another, you had asked about students specifically, so I'll kind of stick with that, Sally. Another tasks that students can take care of this summer is if they were awarded federal work study as part of their, financial aid package, or if the student wants to get a job, a non-work study job. There's plenty of jobs on campus. You don't
Mhm.
have to have a work study award to find a job. But if your student is working on campus, I highly encourage them to log into the Student Employment Office website at their college, start looking at the job boards, looking at the different listings, and the college will differentiate whether it's a work study position or a non-work study. And so your student can begin to kind of sleuth out the appropriate jobs. They can even put in their resume sometimes in advance, get a sense of what's being offered, because there's a lot of jobs, but there's a lot of students looking for those jobs. So it's nice
Hmm.
to get a head start. So I highly recommend kind of looking in advance and not waiting until they've already moved in. If they're
Hmm.
really keen on getting a job, it's nice to kind of start early. And then the last thing
And
that, oh, go
just a
ahead.
quick tip, if you
Yeah.
want a job where you can study late nights in the library, I'm
Yep,
just
that's a
saying.
perfect suggestion. And also working at the athletic center. I see a
Yeah.
lot of those kids, they're just doing the gate and they're
Yeah.
studying.
Yeah. Go ahead and swipe your card. I'm
Yep,
reading my biology
basically.
textbook. Yeah.
Yep, basically, versus like food services, you're going to be on the go. So,
Hmm.
depending on the type of job that you're looking for, and if you want to
Hmm.
multitask, that might drive you in a certain direction.
Hmm.
So I love that tip. And the last tip for students specifically, and of course parents, I like to remind parents that all of the communication from the school goes directly to the student. And the reason for that is privacy laws through FERPA. And so included in that is the actual college bill. So the
Hmm.
first bill likely isn't going to land in your mailbox. Likely it's being electronically sent to the student, or
Hmm.
they're getting an email saying, hey, kiddo, check your portal and print out your bill. So parents really are reliant on the student to either log in or print it out from their email to get that first bill.
Hmm.
A lot of parents don't realize that even though they're probably paying the bill, it's not going to be sent to them. So that's another task for the student really to be on top of, is getting that first bill and future bills as well, and,
Hmm.
and sending those over to their parent.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, so I think we've wrapped up the stuff the students should be doing, but so what do parents need to be thinking about? Or what are things that parents and students both need to do together?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of it they can and should do together. So kind of continuing that conversation about the bill. So the student gets the bill, shares it with the parent, but then together they really need to make a plan, right? Again, making sure the student has done their student loan paperwork if that's something that they're taking out. The parent needs to, with the student, decide who's covering what. Is the student working in the summer, and is the parent expecting them to use their summer earnings to cover personal expenses? I did that with my two oldest. They knew
Mhm.
personal expenses are on you, so don't spend all your summer earnings. So having those conversations about who's covering what. And then
Mhm.
once that's decided, does the parent need to or want to sign up for a payment plan? A lot of those, if you do want to pay kind of incrementally, paying in installments, it's a wonderful way of paying the bill. But a lot of those plans kind of start now. So if that's something you're interested in doing, check the website, of the college to see what payment plan options they offer. The majority of colleges have them, and some have multiple options, but many of them do start, collecting payments now. So that would be an
Mhm.
action item kind of sooner than later. If parents and students need to take out additional loans, now is also the time to start exploring the different loan options that are available. Does the parent want to be the borrower and use the Federal Plus loan? Or does the parent want to be the borrower and borrow through a private institution like a bank or credit union? Or are they looking for the student to borrow and serve as a co-signer on those credit-based loans? So lots of options. And I do encourage families to look at the website of the college where your student is attending. Most colleges have very good information on their website related to loan options. And sometimes they even have recommended lender lists that can get them started. So that's a great place to start. So, really, more about those financial things, how you're going to pay the bill, coordinating, and setting expectations, right, is a big part of it as well.
Mhm. And then what about, I mean, that's a lot to think about
Yeah.
related to the money piece of things. What about like health and wellness, stuff like that?
Yeah, and that there's a lot with that too. So let me try to go through some of the things that were, I guess, really top of mind for me.
Mhm.
And I will preface it that I sent my two oldest off and they were both playing football in college.
Ooh, so
So the
health and
wellness,
wellness is
yeah,
important.
so
Yeah.
health and wellness was really top of mind for me, but I think it should be. I encourage it to be top of mind for everyone, because you just never know what will happen in college. And I do find that being prepared, both I think mentally as well as having any paperwork in place is really important when we're talking about health and wellness. We all
Mhm.
want to make sure our kids are safe, right?
Mhm.
So there's a lot to think about. And then there are some tasks as well related to paperwork that the college is actually going to require of your student as well. So let me touch on that as well. So I have a little list here of kind of the important things related to health and wellness. And the first would be that colleges do require your student to share a copy of their physical as well as their vaccination records. And this typically has to be done prior to allowing the student to register for their classes. I'm pretty sure that both of my kids had like a July 1 deadline for that. So please make sure your student, or if the student's on the line, please make sure you're referring to all of the communication coming from the college. You'll definitely need a physical and immunization records. Most colleges will just have you upload them through the health services portal, but I definitely know some have you mail them in, mail or fax them in as well. So that's something to take care of sooner than later. Another thing to take care of sooner than later is deciding whether or not your student needs the college-sponsored health insurance plan. So by law, colleges need to know that their students are insured. And so they're automatically going to bill them for college-sponsored health insurance. And it can be $2,000 to $4,000 for the entire year, so it's a lot. Many families have health insurance, right, for their children. And so they don't necessarily need the college sponsored one. If they don't need it, they absolutely can waive it. And there's a health insurance waiver form right online, typically at the college. And your student, and I'm just going to say this, usually the deadline is July 1 or somewhere around there. So this is an action item for sooner than later.
Yeah.
Um, if you have appropriate insurance, it's going to cover your student, regardless of where they're studying, for example, you can waive it. And there's a form online. Your student just has to indicate the company that they have coverage through and their policy number, and then they can waive it, and then the college will take that charge off of their bill. And again, it
Mm-hmm.
can be pretty hefty, so definitely something to look into for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say that every college I worked at like would fudge the deadline a tiny bit. And I
Yep.
doesn't mean you should wait, but I mention it because this is not going to go out until the 29th. So they're literally going to have like 2 days. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I think most reasonable college
Mhm.
offices will say, sure, absolutely. I just like to point it out that it's one of
Mhm.
those things that it's kind of a sooner than later thing. But you're right.
Mhm.
If you're listening to this and
Mhm.
it's right around the first, absolutely go online. And if not, just ask, just call the health services office and say, listen, I really don't need this insurance. And
Yeah.
most are going to be reasonable for sure.
Yeah.
So good point on that, Sally. And so those are more like kind of paperwork, so to speak, tasks.
Mhm.
And now I just have some, if we have time, I have some recommendations as to really how to prepare your child to remain safe and things
Mhm.
that you can do in advance in order to help that in the event that, they run into a health issue while they're on campus.
Mhm.
So the first one, and again, this kind of sprung to mind for me when I was sending two football players off, but I made sure that I had a health proxy form filled out for both of my children. You will also hear this referred to as a medical power of attorney. They're essentially the same thing. It's a legal document that gives the agent, and it could be a parent, the opportunity to speak with doctors. So there's a HIPAA form that needs to be signed as well, giving you the ability to have conversations about someone's medical specifics. And then the health proxy allows you to actually make decisions on behalf of your student in the event that they cannot. So certainly it doesn't come into play if they're able to make their own decisions, they're 18, they're adults, but in the event that they can't, that's where the health proxy would fall into place and the agent would be able to make decisions. So it is important, in my opinion, to have this in place in the awful situation where you had to kind of step in and advocate for your student medically. One thing to note, that the majority of colleges will have these forms on their website. So they'll have HIPAA and they'll have health proxies on their website. If they don't, most pediatricians also have them. If not, your state Department of Health or Department of Public Health typically has these forms. So that's where you find them. In many cases, they have to be witnessed. So two people might have to sign after you and your child are signing, and sometimes they have to be notarized as well. So it does take some time. It's not something you do in the parking lot when you're dropping your kid
Right,
off.
right.
So you do need to think ahead for that. And the other thing I'll mention related to this type of paperwork is if your student is studying in a different state than you reside, you might have to do two sets. I had to because my student resided in a different state and they had a different form and different rules and different language. So if your student's not in the same state, just something to think about. So I know it
Okay.
sounds like a lot, but the forms aren't actually that long once you
Okay.
have them.
I'm sorry. So, Jan, I have to cut you off there, but thank you so much. That's really
Sure,
helpful. All right. So,
absolutely.
be sure to join us next week when we'll be talking about what you need to know about student loan repayment. So, that's a big topic.
Yeah.
And we'll also be talking with Tim Matthews of the Honors College at SUNY Buffalo. I really think honors colleges at public universities are wonderful options for students. So, be sure to listen in. And last, remember, you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.